Joseph's story of family dysfunction and abandonment is being rewritten to a story of purpose and healing. God is using Joseph to bring food and deliverance to a nation experiencing severe famine, giving him a purpose. And through that famine, God also brings the brothers who betrayed him to Egypt to face Joseph, giving the family an opportunity to heal. And we saw the scene unfold right before our eyes. Joseph stands there, witnessing his childhood dream come true. His brothers bow before him, asking to buy food, and not realizing that this is the very brother that they sold into slavery. And what does Joseph do? Well, Joseph accuses them of being spies, puts one brother, Simeon, into prison, and sends them back home with an order. Prove your story. Bring back the youngest brother, Benjamin, that you left at home. And will the brothers do the right thing for Simeon? Will Jacob break this pattern of favoritism to allow Benjamin to go with them? You know, it seems like harsh treatment from Joseph is actually God's way of rewriting a different story than their life of guilt. And it's a story of redemption and reconciliation that needs to be written. And it's a story that only God can write. Let us continue.
Thanks, Saida. Good morning, church. Probably the most famous personality quiz is the Myers-Briggs test. You've probably heard of it. It scores you according to 4 different domains of psychometric data, introversion, extroversion, things like that. Do you know your Myers-Briggs? You do? What is it? No, you sat in the front row, man. This is going to happen. I'll tell you mine. Mine is INTJ. INTJ, it's most commonly associated with belly dancers and serial killers. So wait and see. But on all of those letters, I'm pretty much in the middle. I'm average, except for the letter N. INTJ. With the N, it's associated with abstract thinking and also with pattern recognition. And that rings true for me. I love studying patterns, even in the natural world, fractals and swarm behaviors and fish and birds. And I'm good at recognizing patterns externally. I'm not as good at recognizing my own patterns. And I only recognize my patterns in contrast to someone else's pattern. Here's an example. My wife, Rebecca, she has a pattern of not putting the lid back on the toothpaste. And so we've been talking about that pattern because it conflicts with mine. Or maybe you have a pattern of how you like to load the dishwasher, and other patterns aren't good in that way. There's good patterns and bad patterns. Some patterns are life-giving and some are destructive. And that's what we're seeing with Joseph and his family, these patterns in his life, but also the patterns with his father and with his brothers. And some are destructive and some lead to the life and blessing of the nations. Today we're in Genesis chapters 43 and 44, and we're looking at specifically how God breaks patterns and how he makes patterns. If you want to put this simply, God aligns the external interruptions of our world to bring about internal interruptions in our life. God will align the external brokenness of the world with the internal brokenness of our own hearts to make us into the kind of people that he wants us to be. And that's what we're seeing in these 2 chapters. So as Saida said, last week we looked at 42, which is where Joseph and his brothers are first reintroduced after several decades. There's a great famine in the land, and so they go to buy grain from Egypt. And Joseph, he doesn't let down his facade. They think he's Egyptian, and he's using an interpreter. And so he sells them grain, but he tells them, I think you're spies. They say, we're not spies, we're honest men. He says, all right, prove it to me. I want you to go back home and return with your youngest brother, Benjamin. And in the meantime, kind of as a security deposit, I'm going to hold on to one of your brothers here in prison. And if you don't come back with Benjamin, you get no more grain, and you're not going to get your brother back. So they return back home, and they tell this to Jacob. They say, hey, the Egyptian prime minister, he's not going to give us any more food unless we bring back Benjamin. Benjamin is Jacob's favorite son. It's his favorite son. And he says, you're not taking Benjamin. Then Reuben comes forward and he says, hey, Dad, Father, Jacob, if we don't bring back Benjamin, you can kill 2 of my sons. Jacob says, no, I'm not doing that. Benjamin's not going. And so some time passes by. They're all out of food. Jacob says to his sons, all right, boys, go back to Egypt, get some more food. And they say, Dad, we can't return unless we bring Benjamin. And he kind of snaps. He kind of explodes. So let's start 6 verses into Genesis 43. Israel said, Jacob, why do you treat me so badly as to tell the man that you had another brother? Why did you have to say this? And they respond, how would we know he was going to ask for this? But you can tell they're touching on something sensitive because he's popping off a little bit. Why would you tell him this? Why are you threatening this thing? This last son of mine that I love, the youngest, the most precious son. Why is this being threatened? Why is this being touched? Why is this being controlled? He's trying to control this, and he can't. So he's kind of lashing out. And so there's a bit of a dialogue that ensues then, because Judah comes forward. And in 43 verse 8, he says this, and Judah said to Israel his father, send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you and also our little ones. They all had families of their own. I will be a pledge of his safety. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. If we had not delayed, we would now have returned twice. Now Judah comes forward. He says, okay, let us take him, and I will bear the blame if he doesn't come back. And we see his father, Jacob, relenting. He finally says, then their father, Israel, said to them, if it must be so, then do this. Take some of the choice fruits of the land in your bags and carry a present down to the man, a little balm and a little honey, gum, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Take double the money with you. Let me explain that. When they left Egypt, they were supposed to buy the grain with this money. And then when they returned home, they realized the money was put back in their sacks. Not a good sign, because they're worried we're going to return back to Egypt, and they're going to say, you didn't even pay last time. He says, bring the money you owe them, and bring double the silver you need to buy the stuff, and bring some gifts. We're really going to front load this offer here. This is what he says to them. Take double the money with you. Carry back with you the money that was returned into the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Take also your brother, and arise. Go again to the man. This is the important part. May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, and may he send back your other brother and Benjamin. As for me, if I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. So for the last several chapters, we've seen God doing so much in the life of Joseph. Because at the start of the story, Joseph, he's kind of the favorite child, and he's acting in a way which isn't very sensitive. You could say it's a little bit arrogant or proud, and God's been working into his life to take his gifts and develop him into this man who can bless all the nations. But when we go back to his family, we see that a lot of these family dynamics are still around. Jacob is still playing favorites with his son. He's got his one favorite son, and he doesn't want him to go. Maybe it's because he doesn't want Jacob to leave. Maybe it's, he doesn't want Benjamin to leave. Maybe it's because he doesn't trust his other sons still. These unhealthy family dynamics are still there. And for Jacob, really, his chickens are coming back to roost. He has been a terrible parent, he's been a terrible father, and he's kind of ruined the lives of his children from the outset. He plays favorites with Joseph. Joseph becomes a little proud and a little arrogant, and his other sons become envious and bitter and resentful in this way. And so God intervenes, we see, in the life of Joseph, really to be the father that he never had. He's going to get the instruction from the father that he never had. And now we're going to be seeing this happen, how God treats Joseph, also with his father and with the rest of his family. This is the pattern. We see this in Proverbs 3, verses 11 and 12. It says, my son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. In English, we think of the word discipline always as punishment. You got a crazy kid there, you better discipline them. But in the Greek, it's the word paideia. It's where we get the word pediatrics from. And it means the supervision and maintenance of the entire environment of a child so that he or she grows up into strength and maturity. It's kind of nurture with a little bit of teeth. So if you have a kid and you know that there needs to be some elements of discipline in their lives for them to become good, healthy, functioning people. If lying or stealing or fits of violence are not dealt with now when they're 2, they're going to have a terrible life when they're 20 or 30. So it's bringing in just enough discomfort into a person's environment so they grow into a flourishing and mature person. This is what we see with earthly parents. That's really, really hard. How do you not overdo it? How do you bring just enough? You don't want to break them. You don't want to overdo it, but you want them to grow into a person. And it takes a little bit of resistance to do that. That's really hard. Who can do that perfectly? Can any earthly parent do that perfectly? Maybe not. And that's the point. We saw in Joseph's life that God became the father he never had. He's the one who introduces discomfort and discipline to build him into the person that he's supposed to be. Now we see the same pattern happening here in Jacob. God is aligning the external brokenness of the world with the internal brokenness of his heart. Every single person here, we all live in a broken world. That's not very controversial to say, but we also all have brokenness inside of us. And God with Jacob is aligning the external brokenness with his internal brokenness. If you look at the whole life of Jacob, he seems to have a bit of a control problem, you could say. Early on, he deceives his brother Esau to get the inheritance. He wants to control his future in that way. And it kind of blows up in his face. He's estranged from them. And then he goes to Laban, and he wants to work for this wife, but he gets Leah. He doesn't get Rachel, and he needs to keep working. And now he gets another wife. So now he's got multiple wives. At this time in the story, he's got 4 wives. And he chooses, you know what, Rachel's going to be my favorite wife. He's going to pour out his love on her and not the others. And then he has multiple sons. And he says, I'm going to pour out my love on Joseph and not the others. And it only leads to further estrangement and pain and brokenness. And this is a man fighting for control. And now there's a famine in the land, and it's threatening his ability to control things. He wants his favorite son to be protected at the risk of starvation. And God is slowly opening his hands in this way. Necessity really is what forced Jacob to trust God. It was necessity. He wasn't just doing it out of an open-handed posture. It was, okay, we're going to die if you don't let go of your favorite son and come to him. And that could be a question for us, really. Do we trust God only when necessity drives us to, or is it a posture of life that we live in general? It kind of hurts to see this in Jacob. It's bittersweet because earlier in his life, he's the guy who wrestled with God, and he said to God, I will not leave you. I will not let go until you bless me. He is the man constantly interceding with God for God to move. And now he's had a couple decades where he's kind of good at getting what he wants. It's not perfect. He's able to control things. His open hands have closed up tight again. This is the man now who says, I'm not going to let you touch this. I'm not going to let you take this. And the circumstances are making him desperate and opening his hands up again because God is lovingly putting his finger right on the very sore spot of his entire heart. We could imagine Jacob praying for the famine to pass. He's asking God, God, deliver us from this famine, make the famine go away, and the famine stays. And you could think, God, why aren't you changing anything? Don't you love me? Aren't you good? And perhaps God isn't changing the external circumstances because he wants to change Jacob's internal circumstances. He says, I'm going to let this stay. I'm going to strip you of control so you can see that your illusion of control can't control anything. I'm the only one who controls things. And God is a loving parent to reveal this to us. And we see a little bit of the transformation taking place. Because at the very end of this passage we just read, he says 2 sentences. He says, may God Almighty have mercy on you. It's the first thing he says there. It's very interesting because first he calls out for mercy. This is the first time we see that word mercy in the Bible. Mercy is not getting something bad that you deserve. He's saying to his sons, may God be gracious to you. May he not punish you. Wonders what he has in his head going on about the sons. But he says, may God Almighty have mercy on you. That's the word El Shaddai. It's usually used in reference to God's covenant nature. We see this in Genesis 17. God comes to Abraham and he says, you're old, but I'm going to make a great nation out of you. Your descendants will be greater than the number of the stars, and I will use you to bless all of the nations. And so now Jacob, the heir of the covenant promise, is saying, may the God of the covenant, who said he would deliver us, multiply us, and bless the world through us, may he have mercy on you. We see him opening up his hands. I'm sending you out, and now you are in control of the God who has mercy and the God who gives us promises. And then the very last sentence, it kind of confuses me. I've puzzled over it for far too long. He says at the very end, and if I'm bereaved of my children, I'm bereaved. Bereaved means to grieve at the loss of something. And so is he saying either, may the God of mercy and of the covenant promises, God Almighty, El Shaddai, may he have mercy on you. And if I lose my children, so be it. Is this him finally giving up control? Or at the end, is he just kind of saying, may God have mercy on you, and if my kids die, they die? Is he resigning to fate, or is he trusting in God? It's unclear to me, but it actually doesn't really matter because it's showing two sides of the same truth. Either he's doing the right thing or the wrong thing, but the principle still remains, and it's this, that faith and fatalism are not the same thing. Faith and fatalism are not the same thing. Fatalism, think of the word fate. It's the idea that whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I have no input. I have no say. It's out of my control. Let's just ride with it. It's like a roller coaster. My life, I'm just sitting in the car and going for the cruise. God's going to do whatever he wants. If he's going to kill them, he's going to kill them. So be it. Is that what he's saying? Or is he having an act of faith? Act of faith is this. It's trusting in the promises of God and the person of God who gave the promises. Simply being apathetic to what God's going to do is different than accepting what God's going to do. So it's unclear. Is Jacob saying this as an expression of his trust, or is he simply resigning over his control? It's not clear. But for all of us today, like Jacob, where are you fighting for control instead of trusting in God? Where are you fighting for control? Are you trying to control your external circumstances? Or is God using this as an opportunity to open up your hands to him? This is not theologically profound. But it's scary with Jacob because this was someone who was begging for God to move. He was interceding. He said, I'm not going until you bless me, because he knows God is where it comes from. And a couple generations later, his hands close. It's kind of like Jesus warning us about the love of money. This is something that can creep into your heart. Why do we love money? Because we love control. We love comfort. This is something that can happen as a default. And God's trying to show him by interrupting his external patterns that he's fallen back into internal patterns that are destroying him and his family. That's what we see in Jacob. Now, let's go to the brothers. Jacob says, you can take Benjamin. And so the brothers start to return back to Egypt in a worse position than before. When they came for the first time, Joseph accused them of being spies. Now they're coming back, having not paid for the grain they bought in the first place. So they look like spies. They might be accused of being thieves. Their brother Simeon is in prison, and they've got precious cargo in their hands now of Benjamin. The stakes are higher, and they're coming in the worst situation. They come in to Egypt, and the head of Joseph's house says, come on into the house of Joseph. And they think it's a trap. He thinks we're thieves. He's going to bring us into the house. He's going to beat us up. They're going to throw crocodiles at us. This will not be a good time. And the head of the household says, no. They try and pay him back. We didn't think you stole this. Your God has given this to you. Okay. So they're in Joseph's house. They're not in trouble. Simeon is returned back to them, and the attendant says, wash your feet, clean yourself up. You're about to have a meal with Joseph. And so Joseph comes to them. They're reunited. And now let's see what happens next, beginning in verse 26. When Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him the present that they had with them. This was the food, and bowed down to him to the ground. Let's pause right there. So much happening just in that one sentence. When they all bowed down, this is the fulfillment of Joseph's first dream. His first dream was that there were 11 bundles of grain that bowed down, and there was one bundle of grain, his in the center, that was lifted up. He's saying, I'm going to be exalted, and you are all going to bow down to me. They say, yeah, right, let's throw you in a pit. They throw him in the pit. When he's in the pit, they had a meal together. All up top. Joseph is in the pit. They're eating a meal. Now, once again, they're coming to have a meal together. The last time they ate was when they sold Joseph into slavery for this very dream, which was just fulfilled. And they give him a gift from home, nuts and honey and pistachios and almonds. And this might have been the very food that the caravan was taking to Egypt that Joseph was sold into. The last time he saw this stuff, he was part of the package. This very food, these very flavors, these very circumstances that were caused because of his dream are now fulfilled. His dream is being fulfilled because all 11 brothers are bowing down. In chapter 42, it was only 10 brothers. Benjamin wasn't with them. All the brothers are bowing down. These circumstances are being repeated as the dreams are fulfilled. Just a fun point. Let's keep reading. And they bowed down their heads and prostrated themselves. And he lifted up his eyes and said, I jumped a verse. When Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him the present that they had with them and bowed down to him to the ground. And he inquired about their welfare and said, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" They said, "Your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive." That's dream number 2 being interpreted. His second dream was that all the bundles of grain would bow down, and even the sun and the moon would bow down to him. And Joseph told that to his parents. And Jacob said, "What are you talking about? You think your mother and I, the sun and the moon, will bow down to you?" And they said, "Here, our father, your servant." 2 dreams being fulfilled in 2 verses. That's a good deal. He is alive and well. And they bowed their heads and prostrated themselves. And he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your youngest brother, of whom you spoke to me? God be gracious to you, my son." That word gracious, it's the same word for mercy. It's the second time we see it in the Bible. Jacob prayed that the man in Egypt would show them mercy, that God would show mercy. And Joseph is fulfilling this prayer for mercy to them in this moment. God be gracious to you, my son. Then Joseph hurried out, for his compassion grew warm for his brother, and he sought a place to weep. He's so overwhelmed by all this love that he has for him. And he entered his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out. And controlling himself, he said, "Serve the food." They served him by himself, and they by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. These were farmers out from the fields, these Hebrews. We're not eating with them. So they all ate accordingly. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked at one another in amazement. Joseph seated every single brother according to their age. They thought, how in the world would he know this? How does he know this? It's incredibly unlikely to put 11 things in the correct order if you don't know. The odds are like 1 in 40 million. It's 11 factorial. 11 times 10 times 9 times 8. He lays them out in their birth order. He's emphasizing their ages and their rank, and this is what he does. Portions were taken then from Joseph's table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. And they drank and were merry with him. Why is Joseph doing all this? He's repeating the very circumstances where they betrayed him and sold him into slavery. It's kind of like if you remember the prophet with David, and he tells him the story, but it's really about what David did, and David says, "That guy should be punished," and he says, "Ha, it's you." He's repeating the circumstances. Happens in Hamlet as well. Hamlet's trying to catch his uncle who murdered his father, and so he has a play set up, and the play will reenact the circumstances where his uncle killed his father. He's going to watch his uncle's reaction and try and catch him in it. He says, "The play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king." That's what he says. Joseph is doing that exact same thing here. He lays out the brothers in their birth order. He emphasizes their rank. He takes the youngest one and gives him 5 times as much food as all the brothers. He takes the youngest favorite brother and blesses him 5 times as much as the others. Last time that made them jealous and angry. He's repeating these circumstances here. He's making parallels of it in this way. He's really testing them. He remembers how he was treated. Now, why is he doing all this? Is he trying to get revenge? Is he being mean? If you remember in John 6, Jesus is trying to feed the 5,000, and he tells his disciples, "Feed them. We don't have enough food." I said, "Feed them." And it says in John 6, Jesus said this for he knew what he was going to do. That's what's going to happen here. That's what's going to happen again. He's repeating these circumstances. He's setting up the patterns to see if there is a transformation, if there is a change, or if the same thing is going to happen. The stage is set. Now he's going to test them. So they have a great meal together. They have a wonderful time. And the next morning, they're sent back home with all the grain that they want to purchase. Joseph said to his attendant, "Take my cup and put it inside of Benjamin's sack of grain." So they do that. The brothers don't know. Brothers are on their way home. Joseph's attendant goes out, cuts them off, and says, "Why would you insult my master's hospitality like this by stealing from his house?" They say, "We didn't steal anything, man. What are you talking about?" "No, you took something, and he knows. Check our stuff. If there's anything there, let the person who stole from your master be his slave forever." Interesting choice of words. So then the attendant starts going through their sacks of grain from the oldest to the youngest, one by one, until he gets down to Benjamin. They open it up, and Joseph's cup is right there. And it says all the brothers started to tear their clothes. They were so upset by this. That's what you do when something terrible has happened. They were tearing their clothes. They were upset that now Benjamin has to go back. That's not them just saying, ha, Benjamin, got a little cocky back there. Shouldn't have stolen that. Hope you like prison. Hope they serve baklava there. Enjoy the pyramids. They don't say any of that. They tear their clothes. They're moved by this. And then all of the brothers go back to Egypt with Benjamin. They could have gone home. They could have said, all right, we're sending you off into slavery. They don't do that. They show remorse and pain at the circumstance, and in this strange act of solidarity, they all decide to go back to Joseph. Interesting. Now they're in front of Joseph, and Judah comes forward. And he's about to give an address, a very lengthy address. It's one of the most moving addresses in the Old Testament. And he starts telling Joseph what's going to happen to Jacob the father if Benjamin doesn't come back. He pours out his heart. We're only going to read about a third of it, the bottom third. Let's pick up, therefore, here. This is what Judah says. Now, therefore, as soon as I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, if Benjamin stays in Egypt as a slave, then, as his life is bound up in the boy's life, as soon as he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. If Benjamin doesn't come back with us, our father's going to die. He's going to be so heartbroken. And your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant, our father, with sorrow to Sheol. For your servant became a pledge of safety for the boy. Judah's saying, I'm the pledge for this boy. I said he would be okay. If I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father all my life. Now, therefore, please let your servant remain, this is Judah, instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord. And let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father. This is very interesting, because for 99% of the story, Judah has not been a good guy. He's the one who came up with the idea to sell Joseph into slavery. He's the grand mastermind behind Joseph being in Egypt in the first place. And when Joseph is in Egypt, he's doing some terrible stuff back home with Tamar and his daughter-in-law and all the familial relations there. He's not a good guy. And yet he comes in and he says, this is going to break my father. Please don't take the boy. Keep me instead. And this is quite stark, because if you want to be sympathetic to Judah here, he grew up as not a favored son of his father. There's 12 sons. Jacob has 2 favorites. I love these 2, and the others, I don't really care about them. I'm not going to bless them. They're kind of just like free labor. And so imagine living your whole life without the love of your father and the active rejection of your father. Think of the wound that would come from that. And basically, out of that wound overflows pain into others. Oh, you're his favorite? Well, I'm going to treat you the worst of all. Oh, he's going to pour out blessing on you? I'm going to pour out pain and condemnation on you. This is the pattern he's been living out. And this makes sense. This is normal. You reject me, I'm going to reject you. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you. You cast me out, I'm going to cast you out. But something interesting happens here. We see evidence of a transformation. He says, this is going to break my father's heart. And I care about him. So even though he hasn't really shown a lot of care for me, let me stay in Benjamin's place. This is amazing. This is amazing. Because you can think all the years back, he might have said, Dad, I'm happy that you're sad about Joseph. When I gave you the cloak covered in blood and you cried, I was happy then, because I knew you would not cry like that if I died. But there's evidence here of God working in his heart, of breaking patterns. He says, Father, I know you've treated me poorly, but I love you and I don't want you to be hurt. So let me take the place of this son here. And this should ring true for a lot of us. We've all been hurt by people that should have been loving us. We've been mistreated by those who should have treated us well here. This is a pattern. And the person who mistreated you was probably mistreated by someone else. This makes sense. This is the natural way. And we see a very profound pattern interruption here. God is using the same method that he used with Joseph, now with Judah. Derek Kidner, the commentator, when he's talking about this, he says, it seems like Joseph is being very harsh with them, but you can see in his heart he's overflowing with kindness and with love. He can't keep himself together. He's so moved with compassion, he's got to leave the room and cry and clean himself back up, and he comes back in. And it's this hot and this cold that God used with Joseph, the sun and the frost, that breaks him open to God. You think of the natural world. Heat and cold can break open the earth. It can break stones. And with Joseph, he was receiving all sun from his father and all frost from his brothers. So he's sold into slavery. And then in Potiphar's house, he's exalted and given a position of favor and leadership. That's a lot of sun. And then he's wrongfully accused and he's in prison. It's a lot of frost. And in prison, he's given position of influence and status. And then he's forgotten for many, many years again, this hot and this cold. And this opens him up to the person of who God is. And now Joseph, on behalf of God, is doing the same thing to his brothers. He's showing them the seriousness of their wrongdoings. He's literally laying out before them, this is what you've done, this is what you did, and here's a new opportunity in this way. If he gave them just pure justice, if they came and said, hey, can we buy some grain? He could throw them in prison. He might be justified in doing that. That may not change them. He could show them 100% mercy. He could just say, hey guys, it's me, surprise, Joseph. I know it was kind of awkward back then, but I forgive you. He could do pure mercy. That might. But he's doing here the method in Proverbs. This is the discipline of God, nurture with teeth. He's showing them the wickedness of what they did, but also the opportunity for transformation. This is what Joseph is doing with Judah, and this is what God is doing with you. God is using the same method with you as he did with them. The hot and the cold. He's bringing in the external brokenness of the world into the internal brokenness of our lives. He's lining it up in this way. The gospel is the ultimate sun and the ultimate frost that will open you up to God. Why? Well, we see the sun and the frost, and we see evidence of this transformation in Judah when he says, let me be the substitute for the boy. And it's after this, in the next chapter, that they will be reconciled, Joseph and the brothers. And Judah is giving a preview, a foretaste of someone that will come from the line of Judah, which is Jesus. And it's because of Jesus substituting himself that we can be reconciled to God. The gospel is the ultimate sun and the ultimate frost. Here's the frost. That you are so sinful that God had to die. It's a lot of frost. But the other side is this, that you are so loved that God wanted to do it. That's a lot of sun. It's the ultimate sun and the ultimate frost. It's the ultimate condemnation of the wickedness in our hearts, and it's also the most ultimate reassurance of who God is, that we are far more evil but far more loved than we could ever dare or dream to imagine in this way. This is the same pattern with them. This is the same pattern with us. Where is God bringing external interruptions for internal interruptions in your life? Do you know God is the Father? He's not punishing you. Christ bore the demands of justice, so now God can be the loving Father to you. And it's loving of him, of a Father, to open up our hands and show us the futility of the things that we're holding on to. I was talking with a young man a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about how he wanted to get clean from the various substances he was using, hard drugs like crystal meth, and he was also an alcoholic, and he was scared to try quitting again. He said, I want to get sober, but I've gone to rehab 4 times. I don't want to try again. I don't want to fail again and be confronted with all these things again. I asked him, why do you seek these substances? When you're getting high, when you're getting drunk, why are you doing it? And he said 2 reasons. I feel anxious about my circumstances in my life, and I don't want to feel anxious. And I've got a lot of anger in my heart to people who've wronged me. And I don't want to carry this anger around with me anymore. So he does these things to numb it. And I said, it sounds like you're looking for hope and you're looking for peace. You're anxious, you have fear in your circumstances, and you want hope for your present and your future. And you have anger in your heart, wrong things that have been done to you, and you're perpetrating it and perpetuating it onto those around you. You want peace from the pain in your heart, and you want hope in the chaos of the world. And that's what we see here. Jacob, he needs hope. He's trying to control these things, and he can't, and it's killing him and his family. And the brothers need peace because they've done wicked things. They've been hurt by their father, and now they're hurting those around him. And we're the same. We all need hope. We need peace. We're trying to control things. We're scared of who we are and what we've done. We can't control our circumstances, and we're all addicts. We're turning to things. We're using things in this way. And God is aligning the circumstances of our world with the brokenness of our heart. It really changes how we read Romans 8:28. For God works all things together for the good of those who are called according to his purposes. We think of that externally. Yeah, I was in university, I broke my leg, I missed my final exam, had to fail out, I flunked out of school, but I met my spouse in the hospital, so it all worked out well. We think of that externally. We usually don't know what God is aligning through external circumstances. It might take generations for his purpose to come to fruition and completion. We may not know what he's doing until the other side of eternity, externally, but we always know internally what he's trying to do. He's trying to make us into his people, to love him and love others, to be a blessing to all the world, people who will bear the image of his son. It's what he's doing with Joseph. It's what he's doing with Jacob. It's what he's doing with Judah. It's what he's doing with us today. This is the love of the Father who will align these things to loosen our grip on the things that we think will sustain us, but ultimately will not. And if you don't know God today, if you don't know this Father, I would ask you, how's it going? Do you feel the pain of these brothers? Do you see yourself in this story? Do you want to know the true Father, the one who says exactly who you are, but gives you all of himself as well? And if you're a Christian, do you see yourself in this? Because these are all people who are God's people. These aren't just heathens that don't know God. These are people that know him falling back into this. Control and pain and manipulation and passing on hurt, and God wants to break their patterns. Fun fact also, patterns aren't erased, they're replaced. God's trying to replace their patterns, and God's trying to replace ours. What patterns do you have in your life and those of your family you feel God pressing on today? Would we respond in faith and in hope and in trust that he will replace these with something better if we let him do it? That's good news, amen? Would you pray with me? God, we thank you for the story of Joseph, how it's true then and it's true now. Confess that so often we long for control, the illusion of it. It's so comforting, and also that we carry with us the wounds of our past, and consciously or not, we pass it down to those around us as well. We thank you that you came to interrupt these patterns, that you sent your son, that we couldn't change, so you came to change us. He came to bring us a new way, a better way, to give us his Spirit, to stop these cycles of destruction so that we could be free from this. I pray today for people who feel your Spirit pressing on them in these areas. First, that your Spirit would be comforting them, that there's a better way, that there can be freedom, that you do offer liberation to us, that you're not punishing us as a father. You discipline us out of love. You bring in these uncomfortable things to point us to the truth of who you are. We thank you for this. Would your Spirit be reassuring us of this and helping to give us the faith and trust to respond as you would be leading us today, Lord. May it be another day of freedom and liberation in your Son's name for your glory. We ask all this. Amen. Would you stand as we continue in worship? Hey everyone, my name is Sawyer. I'm so glad that you joined us today. If you were impacted by this message and you have a desire to dive deeper into a church community, I would encourage you to join us in person for our full Sunday experience. We'd love to meet you at our Welcome Center and get to know who you are. And here at Bayview, our desire is for everyone, everywhere, to experience God's love. So whether you are a lifelong believer, or you're kind of going through a season of doubts and questioning, or you're simply curious about church, you are welcome and you are loved here. Also be sure to check out our website, bayviewglen.org, for our service times and any midweek events to join. So come be part of our community here at Bayview Glen Church. Can't wait to see you.